I love soaps for the same reason I love comic books. I love to see my favorite characters suffer. Both soaps and comics offer dramatic storylines told over weeks and in some cases years through the lens of camp, action, and heart-bleeding sincerity.
You can't tell me what to do, you ain't my mother! Yes, I am!
Comic books like soaps are categorized as continuing dramas or long-running serials. They have storylines that can go on for years, and while people tend to look down on both mediums, it doesn't stop them from being extremely popular. The best thing about soaps are the characters. Soaps are characters first because they have to be. The characters are the way the audiences engage with the storylines. Despite the often absurd and horrific storylines taking place, soaps maintain an internal logic where characters remain consistent over time. For example, Phil is still a bruiser, Bianca's still a user, and Billy as well. Still Billy. No matter how many problems or horrors a character faces, they rarely deviate from their core beliefs, motivations, or worldview, even when other forms of media would force them to change. This is what I love about soaps. The characters have elasticity. You can take characters to the most extreme ends of themselves, see them at their best and at their worst, but once the storyline is all wrapped up, like an elastic band, they're snapped back to normal. But what is normal? The Enneagram can tell us what normal is and can tell us how the characters are most likely to disintegrate and grow again. Because of the very nature of continuing dramas, these characters aren't allowed to change that much. Although they should retain the information and events the storylines provided, they can't truly grow or learn from their mistakes. Because change isn't the name of the game. I believe the Enneagram is a great tool for writers because it doesn't just show the personality or quirks a character might have, but also the underlying motivations and fears, and most importantly, highlighting the centers of growth and disintegration, i.e., what a character would look like when they're at their best and at their worst, and how they would normally respond to certain events when their back is against the wall. In this video, I will explain what the Enneagram is and how it can be used by writers to create more dynamic characters by revealing the fears and core motivations as well as the beliefs we all have. EastEnders is going to be my point of reference, so I'm going to talk about EastEnders a lot, so spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for a 39-year-old soap opera. Okay, so first of all, what is a soap? A soap, or as the Americans call it, a soap opera, is a serialized program featuring a permanent cast of characters who navigate daily events within an ongoing storyline, and they are part of serialized television. Long-form television relies on specific narrative structures that differ depending on the medium, whether serial or episodic. In a film, for example, the narrative structure is typically closed, with a clear beginning, middle, and end. However, television offers two types of narratives. A serial is a broader series-wide narrative that links episodes together, while episodic has a more contained narrative within each episode that still needs to provide a satisfying setup and conclusion. The episode format is a series of self-contained stories situated in a single episode. They can feature a recurring group of characters or different characters in each episode. A famous example is The Simpsons. Another example is Father Brown. Father Brown, a detective series where, despite encountering a dead body every week, the central protagonist remains unchanged. Yet, serialized television will have characters change over time. A serial work is work where each episode builds off the previous one and sets up future episodes. It assumes the viewer is interested in the series from the beginning. These characters grow with each installment, and as with a book, they're never the same at the beginning as they were at the end. On the surface, this might seem contradictory. A character you've grown to love and identify with, you're now meant to support them changing into someone else. But this is the very basis of an arc, where change has to be inevitable. Every story has elements that may contradict each other, but what holds them together are the core tenets of the text, the essential essences that provide coherence. In a soap where characters undergo significant changes or personality shifts, inconsistencies can arise, especially when these changes clash with specific storylines. However, in a soap focusing on neighbors living in a tight-knit community, characters can take on various roles depending on who they interact with. For instance, Phil, known as an abject womanizer and an iconic bully, can be a comrade to Sharon despite their on-again, off-again relationship, while simultaneously acting as an antagonist to his son-in-law Callum within the same episode. And it works. The square acts like a pocket universe where multiple stories unfold simultaneously and multiple characters can take on multiple narrative devices and roles, being an antagonist or villain one week and a lover and a sage the next. Life, after all, is a series of contradictory anecdotes where someone can be a hero in one story and a villain in another. And soaps embrace this natural inconsistency that wouldn't normally work in fiction, but here it thrives. Okay, so in a nutshell, most serial stories need for your characters to change and evolve over the course of the narrative, having the events of the narrative reshape your characters' worldviews and actions either for better or worse. We love a fallen hero as much as an underdog. However, a long-standing character in a soap must maintain the same central essences, and again, like an elastic band, there needs to be some sort of snapping back to normalcy, or a reset to factory settings. This is in order so another storyline can be put front and center, and so characters can be interchanged. Someone that was a prominent character in one storyline may need to be relegated to the background in another, and is in this change from one storyline to the next that the character has to remain the same at their core. But discovering a character's central core can be tricky. But I believe a system called the Enneagram can be the thing to help make your characters feel more fleshed out and believable. The Enneagram is a system of personality typology that classifies human behavior into 9 basic types. Unlike the Myers-Briggs types, which you might have heard of, which only categorizes 16 different types of personalities, the Enneagram suggests that there are 9 different types of personalities, each with its own unique way of seeing the world, along with its different motivations and fears. According to the Enneagram, each person has one dominant personality type, which typically develops during adolescence. These types influence how we interact with our environment. Essentially, rather than just focusing on personality traits, the Enneagram emphasizes the internal motivations and fears that drive the person's actions when faced with events, or in our case, storylines. By examining the fears and desires associated with each type, the Enneagram offers insight into what drives a person's actions and decision-making. So while the Enneagram has its roots in spirituality and psychology, it's often used to help individuals better understand what drives them and how to harness their natural strengths. The Enneagram is also becoming increasingly popular amongst writers because it offers insight into a character's deepest beliefs. It's not just about an external goal like, I want to save the world, but about uncovering the internal conflict behind that goal, why the character feels compelled to save the world in the first place. Again, it's about revealing the internal conflicts and motivations that influence how that goal is pursued. The Enneagram helps to reveal the deeper emotional and psychological motivations that shape behavior, making characters more complex and relatable. Because if you can work out a person's internal motivation, fears, and beliefs, you can insert conflict that challenges all of that. And thus, you have the makings of an arc. So, what are the Enneagram types? Okay, I'm going to use the wonderful ladies of EastEnders to help explain the different Enneagram types by going through each one and explaining what their motivations, fears, and beliefs are and how they can grow or disintegrate depending on the situation at hand. Oh, and just as a little PSA, I'm going to be using Abby Emmons' Enneagram template to help break down each type and how they can relate to the EastEnders ladies. I'll be linking Abby's video down below. Please check it out. It's a brilliant video on how to get started with the Enneagram. Type 1, the Reformer. The rational idealistic type, principled, purposeful, self-controlled, and perfectionistic. Basic fear of being corrupt and evil. Defective. Basic desire to be good, to have integrity, to be balanced. Key motivations: want to be right, to strive higher and improve everything, to be consistent with their ideals, to justify themselves, to be beyond criticism so as to not be condemned by anyone. Driven by a sense of purpose, the type 1s have a deep passion for justice. They are driven by their desire to improve their world. At their core, they believe that there is a right and a wrong way to do everything, and have a neurotic desire for integrity. They see something wrong and they'll move to change it. They're hands-on people, sometimes literally. However, they are highly critical. Ones don't mean to be critical though, they actually see the potential in everyone and will do what it takes to fix a situation or a person by pointing out the ways they can improve. Healthy ones make deeply personal sacrifices for the good of others because they think it's their entire life's purpose. The one's core identity is in having a purpose, being called to do something good and improve the world around them. Ones are incredibly emotional and have repressed a lot of anger. However, usually only see that When a 1 is criticized, because their own self-criticism makes them super sensitive to others' criticisms. Their greatest fear is that their beliefs, which should be their North Star, ends up causing more harm than good. They're terrified about being the bad guy, because at their best, 1s want to be wise and benevolent through their passion for personal growth and justice. In the case of Linda, her oneness shines the most when it comes to Dean. Her entire sense of justice and morality is called into question when Dean gets away with sexual assaulting her and she gets away with murder. What should be right and justified is not, and what should be evil and unjust is right. And because it's the one's moral compass guiding them, when it's thrown off balance, the entire person is thrown off balance. When 1s are unhealthy, they start contradicting all their rigid morality. They get moody, irrational, and pretty self-indulgent. 1s can start to live in a fantasy world where they can do whatever they want whenever they want. At their lowest, they feel plagued with feelings of intense moral shame and guilt. They take the rage they would normally exhibit to other people and instead turn it on themselves. When 1s are at their best, however, they become spontaneous and carefree. 1s spend so much time controlling themselves so they can do the right thing, but when they transcend this belief and understand that life is full of complexities and nuance, they start to become the wise and benevolent person they wish to be. Type 2, the helper. Caring interpersonal type. Generous, people-pleasing, and possessive. Basic fear of being unwanted, unworthy of being loved. Basic desire to feel loved. Key motivations: want to be loved, to express their feelings for others, to be needed and appreciated, to get others to respond to them, to vindicate their claims about themselves. 2s are driven by desire to give and receive love through acts of service. They are consumed with the need to be needed. However, while some people only help others because they know it makes them look good, the type 2s have a genuine desire to help people. 2s find their purpose in life by fulfilling the needs of others, which drives them to be very committed in relationships. 2s are the most interested in relationships out of all the Enneagram types because relationships are where you find love. The 2 core motivation for serving others reveal their one flaw: their subtle sense of pride. Average 2s serve others because they feel they're in a better place than other people to serve them. 2s usually see themselves in a positive light. However, self-destructive 2s are usually in a codependent relationship and enable self-destructive behaviors in order to ensure they will always be in a position to provide. 2s usually try to help other people in order to distract themselves from their own negative emotions. When 2s are not in their healthy state, their patience finally deteriorates, they become moody, bossy, and super aggressive.
He's in the kitchen eating a biscuit.
But healthy 2s are the perfect example of unconditional love. A healthy 2 is able to see the good and the bad. A typical 2 will usually try to put a positive spin on everything. A healthy 2 knows that life has its ups and downs, and it's best to just sit tight and buckle up, instead of just trying to fix everything out of a sense of pride or obligation. A healthy 2 will just sit in the uncomfortable silence with you and choose to embrace the negative emotions. Type 3, the achiever. The success-oriented, pragmatic type. Adaptable, excelling, driven, and image-conscious. Basic fear of being worthless. Basic desire to feel valuable and worthwhile. Key motivations: want to be affirmed, to distinguish themselves from others, to have attention, to be admired, and to impress others. The Type 3's main desire is to attain success, but what success means to Type 3s is always determined by the dominant culture or environment they're in. Despite how good they look, the 3s struggle with self-acceptance and feeling the need to be validated by their external trappings. They usually feel uncertain about their value. 3s are highly capable people. They are ambitious, creative, and most importantly, have the ability to adapt. They are chameleons by nature. They blend into any environment they find themselves in. They're experts in telling you what you want to hear and embodying what you wish you could be. 3s crave social affirmation because deep down they struggle with feelings of shame and disconnection. They have a deep pull of shame about their identity and their past, and this means they can run on autopilot for a while, as they just lock into work that keeps them feeling accomplished to avoid feeling their true feelings. Unhealthy 3s become exhausted by their own pursuit of success, so they isolate themselves and indulge in unhealthy habits like junk food, drugs, or sex. The 3s give up on themselves instead of investing in some much-needed self-care. However, healthy 3s instead become a more committed friend, partner, and importantly, follower. Being a follower means intimacy, and that can be really scary for 3s because it risks exposing their true identity, which they are unsure of. It is why they decide to keep their distance from the crowd by staying on stage, on the back of a dragon, or behind the bar. But healthy threes are confident with who they are, so they can relax that need for special attention and instead cultivate bonds built on authenticity and self-acceptance. Type 4, the individualist. The sensitive, introspective type. Expressive, dramatic, self-absorbed, and temperamental. Basic fear that they have no identity or personal significance. Basic desire to find themselves and their significance, to create an identity. Key motivations: want to express themselves and their individuality, to take care of emotional needs before attending to anything else, to attract a rescuer. The 4s, more than any other type, are concerned with establishing a unique identity. Their core fear is that they're not significant and that their life has no special value to the world. Unlike the 3s, who are scared they have no value or identity, that they mold themselves into the best thing their environment or culture values, the 4 response to this fear is to go on an ever-evolving journey to find themselves. The 4 feels different from everyone else, and this difference is the source of pride and envy. Despite judging everyone around them, they still think that everyone around them is better off than they are. 4s are constantly thinking about, reflecting on, and discussing their pain. This can be overwhelming to those they're in relationships with, but it makes 4s comfortable with the dark side of life. The best 4 on EastEnders by far is Stacy. Like other 4s, the best thing she offers is the ability to ride the emotional waves of life, through trauma, triumph, and everything in between. You can never overshare with 4s because they aren't scared of dissecting the pain they're feeling. 4s also have a deep sense of beauty and can appreciate the light as well as the dark, helping others by alleviating the burden of having to do life alone. They do this by getting those around them to embrace the everyday beauty surrounding them or taking the time to create it themselves. Unhealthy 4s become needy, however, and hyper-relational, and typically start to foster unhealthy relationships with romantic partners, or they become overly antagonistic with those the 4 blames for their sense of insecurity or independence. When 4s are healthy, they value objectivity and goodness, so 4s go above their natural narcissistic tendencies, and they work proactively to create a stable environment for themselves and others. Healthy 4s stop their search to find themselves, and instead are able to sit with themselves and work on their self-esteem, creating a stable environment professionally and personally. Type 5, the investigator. The intense cerebral type. Perceptive, innovative, secretive, and isolated. Basic fear: being useless, helpless, or incapable. Basic desire: to be capable and competent. Key motivations: want to possess knowledge, to understand the environment, to have everything figured out as a way of defending themselves from threats. 5s spend their entire lives in the pursuit of knowledge. However, this pursuit is usually a mask to disguise the 5's aversion to risk-taking. The 5's core fear is fear of the unknown, so they try to know things before experiencing them firsthand, learning about the world instead of just experiencing it. 5s can be secretive and isolated. They think that everyone else is out for themselves. 5s believe that the only way to protect themselves is by gaining a special knowledge or skill that makes them invaluable to the world around them. Nevertheless, 5s often ignore or can't complete basic tasks, not because they're stupid, but they think there are more important things in the grand scheme of things. What's the point of doing the food shop when you can build an island for a bunch of spy kids to die in?
God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created.
When 5s are unhealthy, they try to numb their sense of anxiety by completing missions and multiple tasks, overextending themselves. However, when 5s are healthy, they become more confident and finally act on all the information that they've gained. Typical 5s feel the need to hoard knowledge before stepping out into the world, but a healthy 5 will take the leap of faith by being secure in the intellectual knowledge they already have and not being afraid to learn things the hard way. Type 6, the loyalist. The committed, security-oriented type. Engaging, responsible, anxious, and suspicious. Basic fear of being without support and guidance. Basic desire to have security and support. Key motivations: want to have security, to feel supported by others, to have certitude and reassurance, to fight against anxiety and insecurity. 6s are complicated. They're rebellious yet responsible, committed yet flighty. They tend to adopt the personality of whoever is in charge or what the dominant culture values. This is all driven by the 6's core fear, the loss of security and relational support. They want to feel safe, and if they feel safe, they're super chill and easygoing, but if they don't, they become super aggressive. A common phrase within the world of the Enneagram is that the 6s are either at your feet or at your throat. This makes sixes pretty diverse, but what is a common thread is that they will defend their beliefs and their relationships to the very end. Sixes are very much a ride or die, but sixes need for things to feel concrete in their alliances, their plans, their countries, etc. to exhibit that loyalty. If not, they'll bounce. Sixes feel that unshakable commitments earn them safety and protection. Sixes lack the inner guidance and confidence needed to trust themselves, which is why they are constantly attaching themselves to bigger and stronger partnerships or institutions, like marriage. Like, seriously, how many times has Kathy gotten married? And honestly, I think she has another one in her. When sixes are unhealthy, they try to overcompensate their self-doubt by becoming overly cocky, competitive, and arrogant. They become obsessed with their careers and their families. When sixes are healthy, they become more present and calm, embodying the assurance that they've been seeking from an external source, and instead finding it within themselves. Type 7, enthusiast. The busy, variety-seeking type. Spontaneous, versatile, and scattered. Basic fear of being deprived and in pain. Basic desire to be satisfied and content, to have their needs fulfilled. Key motivations. Want to maintain their freedom and happiness, to avoid missing out on worthwhile experiences, to keep themselves excited and occupied, to avoid feelings of pain. The sevens are defined by their appetite for new and exciting experiences. Sevens bring a joyful, curious attitude to everything and everyone, and excel in lots of different things. They want to consume all that life has to offer, which is why their weakness is gluttony or self-indulgence. Sevens have an insatiable appetite for something more or different because their greatest fear is boredom, feeling trapped, or just experiencing any negative emotions at all.
Do you guys ever think about dying?
I don't know why I just said that.
They're the embodiment of FOMO. Sevens are more concerned about just having a good time for the sake of a good time. Because if everyone is having a good time, then they don't need to think about all the times that they were sad, miserable, or alone. And I'm saying this as a seven myself, we do not like pain.
Special announcement. There is no more sadness. There is only dance.
If I keep on moving, then the pain goes away. And if I don't stop moving, then the pain cannot stay. And if I keep on grooving, then the pain won't catch me.
The big challenge for sevens is the ability to stay committed to people or practices long enough to rediscover the deeper beauty than they initially realized. When sevens are not doing well, they become rigid and hypercritical of those around them for not being as capable or enthusiastically supportive as the 7-1s. Disintegrated sevens will turn on the very people who help them and lash out at them by naming all the ways that life has not met their needs. However, healthy sevens seek out deeper understanding of their experiences. Healthy sevens are full of gratitude, wonder, and patience that finally lets them give back to the world instead of consuming what it has to offer. Type 8, the challenger. The powerful, dominating type. Self-confident, decisive, willful, and confrontational. Basic fear of being harmed or controlled by others. Basic desire to protect themselves, to be in control of their own life and destiny. Key motivations. Want to be self-reliant, to prove their strength and resist weakness, to be important in their world, to dominate their environment, and to stay in control of their situation. 8s find their identity by overcoming obstacles and imposing their will on their environment. 8s feel naturally challenged by life, so they challenge it right back. 8s tend to feel like a vigilante. 8s tend to be workaholics because they have a lot of mental and physical energy to dominate their environment. 8s work so hard because their core desire is to be in control of their life. The 8's core fear is all tied with being controlled or harmed by others. 8s, however, don't feel that fear too viscerally because they avoid their emotions like the plague and prefer physical or logic-based work. Unsurprisingly, 8s don't have that much patience for weakness, so there is no point in appealing to their softer side. Vulnerability creates the opportunity to being hurt or abandoned, and that scares 8s more than anything. 8s are most likely to dominate their intimate spheres, like work, family, or their community. Unlike the 3 who want to be prime minister because it looks good, the 8s are happy just being a local councillor. They don't want the world, but they'll take this city. They want to control and have power over the environments that will most likely cause them harm, like their family or their workplace. 8s do, however, have a soft side. They are sensitive souls, and their fear of being abandoned or hurt comes from an emotionally intense place, because they are emotionally intense people, even though they don't want to show it. They are like a wagon wheel, hard on the outside, soft and gooey on the inside. 8s, when becoming unhealthy, disintegrate by retreating into the world of the mind. Unhealthy 8s begin to sense that they have exposed some vulnerability and so have to isolate in order to strategize on how to get that power back. However, healthy 8s come off their high horse and realize it is more fulfilling when they treat others like equals, and they become less self-serving and display unconditional love. Type 9, the peacemaker. The easygoing, self-effacing type. Reassuring, agreeable, and complacent. Basic fear of loss and separation. Basic desire to have inner stability, peace of mind. Key motivations: want to create harmony in their environment, to avoid conflicts and tensions, to preserve things as they are, to resist whatever would upset or disturb them. 9s are driven by a deep desire to create and maintain harmony in their environment, which means their core fear is essentially anything that disrupts that. 9s are terrified of losing the people or things they've come to love, which is why they work so hard to maintain the status quo, for better or worse. 9s have a natural sense of empathy, but sometimes they empathize so deeply with others that they lose touch with their own inner thoughts and feelings, or in some cases, better judgment. A weakness of their 9 is their deep avoidance of negative emotions or harsh reality. This can look like apathy or laziness. 9s are masters at numbing their pain, but no one ever calls them out on it because they seem super supportive and chill. 9s are super observant people that see a lot more than they say, and if they took the risk of leaving the safety of the cocoon, they could be great pioneers for change. 9s, when they're unhealthy, become filled with anxiety about what they might lose, so they double down on their work and their relationships. Unhealthy 9s say yes to the demands of their family and work out of fear and obligation, and they become passive-aggressive. However, a healthy 9 will become confident, stand up for themselves, and be proactive in taking steps towards their self-improvement and the improvement of others. How can soaps help writers with the Enneagram? As we've established, utilizing the Enneagram means understanding a person's basic fears, beliefs, and motivations, as well as what their healthiest and unhealthiest self looks like. Because if you know what the healthiest and unhealthiest version of your type would look like, you have the makings of a character arc. Okay, so for example, a storyline about a person who grew up in an abusive home is struggling to connect with the family they have now because of the trauma they faced. Now, you can do a basic story like that if you want, but the great thing about the Enneagram is that you can have different ways of telling the story through different Enneagram types. For example, if you're writing a type 1 reformer who tends to see the world in black and white, they think that justice and injustice cannot go hand in hand. The type 1 character will likely take on the guilt of knowing that their abusive family or parents did not love them, and then they will then grow up with a strong sense of righteousness. However, they will see the world in black and white. The type 1 would have grown up believing that there is only one way to be a good parent. Now, their narrative journey can be about how life is complicated, and there is history and context that plays into everyone's decisions and informs the ways that we love one another. Their big narrative journey is about how they have to overcome their rigid judgment and learn to either forgive their abusive family or connect with the family they have now by not holding them to an impossibly high moral standard. Now, this story would look completely different if it was a type 8. They actually might take on some of the traits of the abusive family member or parents themselves. The 8's primary motivation is to avoid being oppressed or in fear, so they instead will try and control and dominate their environment and family to minimize the chance of that happening again. Now, the 8's whole narrative journey will be about how you can't do that, and that you can't control the people you love out of fear. That love comes with sacrifice, submission, and vulnerability, giving the other person the chance to hurt you. And the more you try to push and control your family, the more likely it is that you'll end up alone. It's the same story, but with 2 different arcs. Again, the great thing about the Enneagram is that you can see how different types are most likely to react within the same story. Take Linda, a type 1 in a complicated whodunit. That's not really a whodunit. During the 2023 Christmas special, Linda murdered Keanu Taylor, saving her best friend but condemning her. Linda's biggest problem is that her morality is getting in the way of her being competent. She feels terrible about taking another person's life. Another type 1, she has strong moral boundaries that she believes she cannot cross. However, if it was a type 8 Suki, the story would look completely different. Instead of having to grapple with their own morality and inner critic, the 8's basic fear is the lack of control. The type 8 storyline would be about how Suki has lost control of the situation, having to rely on other people. She knows she needs to get the job done. She's someone who has struggled, but through her own sheer willpower has created an environment where she can be in charge. However, the Keanu storyline will throw all that into question. Now that environment has been threatened due to the lack of control she has over that situation and being at the behest of other powers, being at the mercy of evidence of the crime, the other women, and the policing system. For Suki, the arc won't be about, oh, I feel bad about killing another person. It will be, oh shit, I'm working with a bunch of idiots. One tip I do want to give is to ignore the typology names. I know I mentioned them earlier, but ignoring the label of achiever, reformer, or investigator will loosen you up and offer more story options. The labels are all inconsequential because you really just want to focus on the essence of each type, because the names don't matter in the grand scheme of your story. If you have a character that is a type 2, for example, you don't need to necessarily specify them as the helper. Just because your character is a type 9 doesn't mean they need to be a good person, just because the label is the peacemaker. In fact, some of the most interesting characters in fiction are characters that display type 9 tendencies but aren't actually good people, like Paul from Dune, Nick from The Great Gatsby, and Sonia from EastEnders. Sonia is a typical type 9. She likes to think of herself as a peacemaker, but in reality she can actually be quite detached and display a lack of concern. She is selfish because she would rather have everything work itself out instead of dealing with the temperamental and complicated issues that come from her environment. Again, a type 9 doesn't have to be a good person. In fact, they could very well be the villain, because in their fight to maintain the status quo, they could uphold as restrictive and oppressive regimes. In Sonia's case, she is more preoccupied in having the harmonious family life, having a baby, a fiancé, and keeping her grandmother's house. Her willingness to overlook her fiancé's Reese many red flags by being supportive ends up being her downfall. She ends up becoming the villain in her own story. However, she still has type 9 traits of being loving and supportive, because it was only a few weeks ago she was the steadfast friend Whitney needed before leaving the square. Again, just because the Enneagram has labels doesn't mean they need to be archetypes. Your characters can have the traits of an Enneagram type, and it is up to you whether they become the hero or the antagonist. It's also interesting if you have a character that's a certain type that actually isn't very good at being that type. Again, let's go to Reese and Sonia. Sonia is a great type 9, but Reese is a terrible type 8. Type 8s want to control their environments and make sure that they have everything they need in order to not feel oppressed or live in fear. They will go above and beyond what is expected in order to maintain control over their environments. Now, Reese does exactly that, but he does it really badly. Reese is a type 8 who believes he's a type 2 or 1, that he has strict moral boundaries and can be empathetic or helpful. Even though on the surface a type 8 might look like full of Suki, Reese's core fear drives him, so whatever the situation is, he still has a modicum of control, which is why he steals from his neighbors, gaslights his fiancé, and murders his comatose wife. Reese is a great character to describe what the Enneagram really is. It's about pathology, not personality. On the surface, a type 8 like Phil will go about his choices completely differently. But in seeing the Enneagram as more of a diagnosis that reveals what you're most likely to do when your back is against the wall can completely change your writing game. In moments of great stress and danger, your core essence is what is revealed. This is the person you turn to. This is the person that's innately inside you. For Reese, it is a liar, a thief, and a killer. Even though on the surface he looks weakly, snivelling, and a little bit pathetic, he's actually a very dangerous and manipulative man. Concurrently, Sonia's type 9 comes out in full force in the storyline. In the face of mounting debts and personal crises, this is the time you want to take control and step up, but Sonia relinquishes her control and slides into a sense of apathy and willful ignorance in a situation where she needs to step up, which is why she's in prison and Reese isn't. Sorry for the change in setup. My camera keeps dying and I'm pretty sure the universe hates me because I can't put my phone on my tripod. Also, I don't have a tripod, so this is what we're working with. Just, keep up. Again, you can do whatever you want with the Enneagram. Do you have someone in your story who is a type 5 but struggles with the neurotic organizing that comes from acquiring a lot of information? Do you have a type 2 that wants to be helpful but struggles to overcome their societal prejudices? The great thing about using the Enneagram as a tool is that you can choose how deep into the Enneagram theory you want for your writing. I personally just like using the standard Enneagram types and the modes of growth of disintegration. I use it as a very basic jumping off point for me to get to know my characters better and seeing how they might react. However, if you want, you can dive deeper into Enneagram theory and do a little bit more homework on how different Enneagram types relate to each other or the subcategories within each type. For example, learning about the concept of wings and the Enneagram instinctual subtypes can be useful when you're writing a large ensemble. For example, if you're writing a medical drama, the chances are that most of your characters are going to be type 2s. They're going to be helpers who love to help people. But you can't have an entire cast of typical type 2s. So you might have to have a cast of type 2 wing 1s or type 2 wing 3s, or you might have a type 2s that are self-preservation type 2s, social or sexual. Go as deep as you want into Enneagram theory, but remember it's a tool. Just like Joseph Campbell's wheel or Todorow's theory, it's just a way for your brain to start thinking of characters as real people. Another thing about the Enneagram is that you might have a story that speaks to a particular Enneagram type, but your main character can be a completely different Enneagram. For example, The Walking Dead is by all means a soap in itself. Usually is a story where you need to be a type 8. In the fight for survival, they need to gather resources and literally take control of their environment. But in doing so, you have an entire world of type 8s. So what do you do with your type 1 characters? In conclusion, the Enneagram can be a brilliant tool for writers in discovering their characters' basic fears and desires, and then re-engineering it to create an arc. Your character believes the only way to be loved is to be admired. They're probably a 3, so throw them in a situation where they have to become their authentic selves. Your character believes justice is black and white. They're probably a 1, so throw them into a story where that's tested. The Enneagram can be a great tool if you're thinking of writing a long-running serial. Yes, your characters should grow and change, but every once in a while, you push a reset button that brings your character back to page 1. And when you're back on page 1, you have more story to tell.